Horror movies are known for their gruesome and gory approach in hopes of scaring the viewer, and though some are successful, many films have received low acclaim and poor ratings for being predictable, and only seem to be a film about blood and gore.
No.
Recently, a successful genre we have moved on to is the more psychological horror. Though still containing some gore, mainly causes us to think critically and become mentally uncomfortable with themes and ideas presented within the film. Today we are going to talk about the 2014 hit indies film, The Babadook, written and directed by Jennifer Kent. It tells the story of a widow named Amelia, played by Essie Davis, and her son Samuel, played by Noah Wiseman, as they fall into a deep well of paranoia when a sinister children's book manifests within their home, bringing to life a dark, tall figure called the Babadook. But what made a film about a mother and son so scary and successful? Let's talk about it.
You can't get rid of the Babadook.
First, this film took a very different approach to creating a monster, with its important theme of grief, depression, and struggle, especially for a single mother, that being Amelia within the film. Within the first few minutes of the film, we see Amelia as she recounts how she lost her husband in an automobile accident while he drove her to the hospital to give birth to their son. Automatically, we feel for her, and in some ways we all can relate to her due to the simple fact that we have all grieved when losing a loved one. Throughout the film, she will sometimes not allow Samuel to hug her, she doesn't like to see any form of intimacy in public or on television, and she rarely goes down to the basement where her husband's belongings rest. Samuel doesn't help, because due to the lack of a father figure, he misbehaves and struggles in school, causing even more strain on his mother, who was called from work on several occasions to deal with him. In an interview, the director, Jennifer Kent, explains that her reasoning behind the film wasn't just to create a horror movie. Quote, "I never approached this as a straight horror film. I always was drawn to the idea of grief, and the suppression of that grief, and the question of how would that affect a person. When I was developing the script, or even while shooting, if it didn't ring true, we wouldn't do it. So yeah, there are horror tropes in there, but they're always in service to the deeper meaning. The Babadook is a physical form of grief, hunting her and, at one point, consuming her and pushing her over the breaking point. It isn't until the end of the film when we see that with the aid of her son, she expels the Babadook and stands up to it, proving she is strong, shrinking the Babadook down to a frail, scared thought, and has it running down to the basement where she keeps it locked up for the remainder of the film. Now that we know the story, how do we view it? Well, Ken had some insights to that as well. Even though she didn't want this to be a strictly horror film, Kent meticulously used her knowledge of mise-en-scene and cinematography to enhance that feeling. For a refresher, mise-en-scene is the arrangement of props, sound, outfits, and setting within a play. Kent explains that she put a lot of thought into the production of the film, with a bare color palette of mainly blacks and whites, with some blues and pinks, to achieve a barren and dark approach and a very closed-in house that, through moving walls and spaces, morphed the setting as Amelia became more and more influenced by the Babadook. She went on to using sound as a gateway of immersing the viewer in the world of the character, and only used music when sound no longer told the story, blending them through musical strain so they worked together to create the horror.
What did you say?
I said you're not my mother!
I am your mother!
The cinematography, on the other hand, is the art of visual storytelling and comprises all on-screen elements like lighting, framing, camera motions, and the list can go on. Kent was a genius in using amazing lighting, such as high contrast directional light, to create tons of shadows, which got more and more heightened and surreal as the film went on, falling off into nothingness and focusing the energy of the character. In regards of camera work, she explains how camera work allows her to move the audience in a specific direction, stating,
So I'm obviously very focused on actors, but I feel equally focused on camera. My job is to move an audience in some direction, and I think camera has a lot more to do with that than some people realize. So if it needs to feel cold and sparse and bare, I might do really sort of locked off wide shots. I used a lot of that in the Babadook. As the film went along, she would drift off to the side, and so we had a lot of negative space, which makes an audience, whether they're aware of it or not, start to feel uneasy. I wanted it to feel like a pair of hands gently placed on the audience's neck, growing tighter and tighter and tighter until they felt they couldn't breathe. And the camera, amongst other things, was a way to achieve that. So this is the one and only Babadook POV. I wanted us to see her seeing it. This shot makes me laugh because the camera was on a rope and we just hoiked it down the stairs, which is probably not good for insurance, but that's how we got that shot.
With the masterful story and style of the film, the Babadook has since grown a fandom over the years, with people loving the cynical look of the tall, lengthy creature and the sad story between a mother and son. It was released in Australia in 2014 and, though it wasn't extremely popular on its original release date, critics loved it, and it was nominated for 6 Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Art Awards.
And that film is The Babadook, this year's recipient of the Byron Kennedy Award.
Overseas is where it shined, first winning at its first film festival, Fright Fest, in August 2014, and continuing to win upwards of 56 awards across several countries for categories like Best Actress and Actor, Best Screenplay, Best Picture, Best Cinematography, Best Horror, and the list goes on. In the US, it won several awards at festivals, and with its first night showings in only 3 movie theaters across the country, it grossed over $30,000. By February of 2015, it grossed over $1 million in the US and $10 million elsewhere in the world, and continued to have screenings still rolling out across the US at that time. It continues to this day to get several amazing reviews from critics and audience, stating in the 2022 article in Parade that it is, quote, the best horror movie so far of this century, and is definitely a modern cult film everyone should add to their list and see at least once. Thank you.